Hi, I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is the Candice Malcolm Show. Thank you so much for joining us. We've got a great show lined up for you today, but before we get to the news, I want to stop and pause and reflect upon the situation we find ourselves in today, in late January 2025. We don't have a prime minister in this country. We don't have a federal leader, and we don't have anyone representing us and our country or standing up for Canadians. It was just 2 weeks ago that Justin Trudeau announced that he was resigning.
I intend to resign as party leader, as prime minister, after the party selects its next leader through a robust, nationwide, competitive process.
He said he was stepping down as leader of the Liberal Party and as Prime Minister, citing internal squabbles in his cabinet and his caucus in his Liberal Party. Presumably and notably, he was talking about Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland, the Finance Minister, who resigned. Now she's out there doing media rounds, bashing her former boss, saying that she disagrees on him on everything from the carbon tax to capital gains taxes to the GST rebate to his strategy in dealing with our American ally. Now, also recall that third-party leader Jagmeet Singh has let it be known that the moment the parliament resumes, his party, the NDP, the ones who have been propping up Trudeau and the failed Liberal minority government since 2019, they will vote against the Libs in a non-confidence vote and trigger an election. So rather than facing this reality, rather than allowing Canadians the opportunity to elect our next leader and our prime minister, instead of allowing democracy to run its course, Trudeau has used a loophole in our Westminster system of government, system of parliamentary democracy, to prorogue the House of Commons to avoid triggering an election. He's just pressed pause on democracy for crass partisan purposes. Now, if this doesn't make you question our very system of government, make you doubt how well our government functions, I don't know what will. It is insane that a prime minister can first derail the economy with his terrible woke policies and then just pause the democracy to take time to regroup within his own party. Now, that was the situation on January 6th when Justin Trudeau resigned without actually resigning. Then everything got so much worse because we just don't have a prime minister. As you know, US President Donald Trump is no fan of Canada's Liberal government. He openly mocks Trudeau, calling him the governor of the 51st state, an insult to all Canadians. And he doesn't much like Trudeau's deputy, Chrystia Freeland, either, who goes out of her way to bash him. Now, Trump is very serious about immigration. He's serious about border security, national security, and energy security. And he is very willing to impose devastating tariffs on our country to protect his country. We need to fix this mess. Canada is already suffering through a cost of living crisis unlike anything I have seen in my entire life. Our economy is on the rails, the loonie is collapsing, and every day Canada feels a little bit more like Venezuela. Crime is out of control, drug use is rampant, and overdoses are far too common. Mass, unchecked immigration has created not just ballooning housing prices and rent prices, but an existential identity crisis in Canada. Being Canadian doesn't mean anything anymore, and foreign tribal feuds are spilling out onto our streets every single day. We need leadership. We need a prime minister. Not these clowns who are making a mockery of our country. Justin Trudeau no longer has the confidence of the House, he no longer has the confidence of Parliament, and he no longer has the support of Canadians. He doesn't have a mandate anymore. He resigned for goodness sake, and he needs to go. Liberal insiders and global elites should not get to select our next prime minister in an undemocratic internal selection process that is ripe for abuse and foreign interference. Enough is enough. Stop being polite, Canada. You should be angry. That is why today I am launching a petition. This is from my own website, CandiceMalcolm.com. It is separate from my journalism and separate from True North. But Canada needs an election. We need an election now, not in 3 weeks when the federal court will hear a case about the legality of prorogation, and not in March after the Liberals have their leadership review and select their next leader. We need an election now. Now. Please sign my petition so we can send our reckless elite a message. Sign it, send it to everyone you know, and help me send this message to Parliament. Let Canadians choose our next Prime Minister. We need an election. We are, after all, a democracy. Thank you very much. In studio with Keean Bexte from the Counter Signal. Keean, great to have you here. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So you were recently down in Washington, D.C. watching the inauguration. And one of the main things that came out, one of the executive orders that I was really excited about was just getting back to common sense, the idea that there are only two genders. So I have it here, Trump's executive order when it comes to defending women from gender ideology extremism. He says that the executive order reads that sex shall refer to an individual's immutable biological classifications as either male or female. Sex is not synonym for, does not include gender identity. That women and girls shall mean adult and juvenile female humans, respectively. Same for men. That female means belonging at conception to the sex that produces the large reproductive cell, and that male is a sex that produces a small reproductive cell. I appreciate that it even says at conception, not at birth, but as conception. So there's a bit of a pro-life message in there. That was just one of Trump's incredibly strong executive orders. I know you were talking about his getting out of the WHO as being a major point that you're happy about.
Yeah.
What else was sort of the big takeaways from your time in Washington?
Well, just those executive orders. It's nice to see that there's like a return to common sense. And you said it well. And I think that it shows that conservatives in Canada have been so ahead of the curve on this. Danielle Smith, her action in Alberta to protect women and girls in sport, and Pierre just running on literally common sense, bringing back common sense. It must be vindicating for them. The question now is, do Canadian conservatives have the same follow through that Trump has had? Not many conservatives get into office and do what Donald Trump did, and on day one have a stack of executive orders on their desk that tall and just go through them. Bang, bang, bang. This is law now. Are we going to see some waffling for the first year? I hope not. I hope Pierre knows what to do, knows what Canadians want, and knows what they need. With the WHO, I mean, that was a no-brainer. It's a disastrous bureaucratic organization, very similar to the World Economic Forum in terms of their waste, in terms of their belief that they know better than the common man. Getting out of that was a huge win for the Americans. The amount of money that they spend on the World Health Organization is sickening, especially when they don't make up the majority of the global population. They're spending that basically providing free healthcare through a wasteful bureaucratic organization to everyone on the planet. And they were footing a huge part of that bill. Canada also foots a huge part of that bill. We're the fifth largest contributor to the World Health Organization. We hand the organization about $250 million a year.
It's unbelievable.
It's a gross amount of money, and that the leadership of that organization is this and I'm not even a conspiracy theorist here when I say that they're like this cabal of communists from Africa that are running it and taking our money and wasting it. So I hope that Pierre gets the message and follows suit with Donald Trump and the huge success that he's seen in just the first 3 days that he's had in office, and pulls Canada out of the World Health Organization as well.
I just think these are such mainstream ideas. I think that when we watch what happened with the pandemic and how these edicts were coming from this World Health Organization, it clearly seemed like a corrupted organization that somehow was having huge power and control over our lives. Now, I know that it's the elected government in Canada that gets to implement the laws. But the edicts were certainly coming from these kinds of organizations. It was a breath of fresh air to see Trump say no to the Paris Climate Accord and no to the WHO. I really hope that the Conservatives follow suit, like you said, like Pierre, if he becomes Prime Minister, when I'm urging Canadians to sign my petition and call for an election. Like, we need an election now. I think 77% of Canadians say that they agree. It blows my mind that Justin Trudeau can just pause democracy. He can just press pause for his own party to try to regroup. It's embarrassing in Washington. You were just in Washington. What were you hearing? What were you seeing when it came to Canada and sort of our lack of leadership and presence there?
I heard a lot. I spoke with a lot of staffers from the Republican side of Congress, and they seem to think that this tariff thing was a lot of posturing, and they just wanted a few simple things. They wanted at least the Canadians to come to the table and negotiate in good faith, which they say they just haven't been. They've been completely AFK, AWOL. They're just missing in action, and that, we know why, because the government is in tatters. Most of Justin Trudeau's cabinet has either committed to resigning or committed to the leadership race, and they're focused on getting Mark Carney elected or Chrystia Freeland elected. So it's just a disaster all around. They're not at the table negotiating with the Americans, and that's going to be a huge disaster for us, which is why Danielle Smith has taken it upon herself to go. I wish other premiers, Doug Ford has complained a little bit about it. David Eby should go down. Rob Canoe should go down. These provincial leaders have a mandate, a fresh mandate in most cases, from their people to put their provinces first, and they should be going down and standing up in it. Sure, go with a united front, go with a message that is pro-Canada and Canada first, but they have a responsibility to make sure that their provinces are not going to be left scarred by the mistakes of the absent Trudeau regime. Danielle Smith has a huge issue right now, making sure that energy gets, and she's not doing that just for energy producers in Alberta. She wants energy to be exempted from the tariffs, which would be great for Alberta, but it would also be great for Ontario, who relies on our energy as well, which gets sent through the American border. Twice. It goes down south, west of the Great Lakes, and then back up east. So it's going to be a disaster for Doug Ford. I think that Canadian premiers have got to get on board with what Danielle's doing and actually start fighting for their people.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not from Alberta. I don't live in Alberta, but I think that Danielle Smith speaks for so many Canadians, myself included, when she is saying that, no, the idea to get into a trade war here and have retaliatory tit-for-tat tariffs is not the way to go. Yeah. Let's negotiate a deal. Let's show up in good faith. Negotiate a deal. We just don't have a prime minister to do that. Okay, I'm going to ask you more questions about your time in Washington, but we have to get to this Pierre Poilievre clip. So, speaking of gender, we had Trump with this wonderful executive order defending women from gender ideology, and Pierre, not to be outdone, so he was on, I think it was, Breakfast Television or CTV, one of those, and he was asked whether he would follow suit with what Trump did and only recognize two genders. It's classic Pierre. Yeah. I love this. Okay, let's play this clip.
First day on the job, President Trump signed an executive order, the U.S. government only recognizing two genders, male, female. They're unchangeable. If elected as prime minister, is that something that you're going to kind of walk in line with, or what are your feelings on that executive order?
Well, I don't know. Do you have any other genders that you'd like to name?
Me personally?
Yes.
I'm just asking more so if you're in line with what he is saying. Do you agree with what he's saying? Is that something that you would be lockstep with if elected as prime minister?
Well, I'm not aware of any other genders than men and women. I mean, if you have any other that you want me to consider, you're welcome to tell me right now.
Well, there's personally, I am a man. I am a As people who say cis man. There are people there who, they say they're gender neutral. Well, you are a man, yes. There are people out there who say they're gender neutral. Yeah, they say they're gender neutral. They're a trans person. Is that something that you would recognize here, whereas in the States, at least with their U.S. government, the way they're seeing it, there's only two?
I'm only aware of two, but I mean, if you come up with another list, then you're welcome to do that. But I'm aware of two, and as far as I'm concerned, we should have a government that just minds its own damn business and leaves people alone.
Amazing. So that was Phil Perkins of CP24 asking the questions there. What did you think, Keean?
It was a classic Pierre interview. Just like the Apple interview, he puts the onus on the reporter to actually stand behind the idiocy of what they're asking. He's a smart politician, obviously. That is a great answer. But if you're of the position that he should actually take action, it could leave people a little bit concerned because he didn't actually commit to doing what Donald Trump did. He just sort of ridiculed a reporter, which, again, hilarious, love it. But I want a commitment that says, yeah, there are two genders. We're not going to allow XYZ on your passport. We're not going to allow. I want as a ideologically driven person to hear a commitment that he's going to make Canada better. But I think I know what he's getting at. I think we both do. So it's good news that he's not allowing reporters to run the show. That's at least the first step. The second step would be like concrete action, but we'll see what we get.
Well, no, it is classic Pierre, and I love the point you make where he makes the report. He puts the onus back on the reporter, right? Because reporters in Canada are so used to just having their way with conservative politicians and basically humiliating them based on liberal dogma, right? And so here you have a journalist who's just trying to do what they've always done, which is like what Donald Trump did was scary and you have to walk away from it. And then Pierre just so skillfully turns around and it's satisfying because really, like, what is he talking about? Like, what other genders?
Yeah.
Name one, right?
Yeah.
Name one. And then he, the reporter kind of awkwardly goes back to this idea like, well, I'm a male, a cis male. It's like, what does that even mean?
They
I'm
know
sorry.
all the words to
of
use,
course.
the talking points.
And then Pierre says, well, I'm a man too. Like, congratulations. It kind of reminds me, it was about a year ago where we at True North were reporting intensively on this topic of puberty blockers that are going to be given to children. And we didn't know where Pierre stood. I didn't know at the time whether he was going to come out in support of just biological reality or whether he was going to go down this left-wing rabbit hole of allowing kids to transition and all kinds of drugs being given to very confused minors. I want to play this clip because it kind of had the same vibe where he kind of almost plays dumb and then he ends up coming to the right place. So let's play that clip.
Advanced surgeries and medical interventions for minors, as your own party members suggested.
Medical interventions like what?
That is the language that your party
What medical
used.
interventions?
Well, you would have to ask your party members.
What medical
such
interventions?
Such as puberty blockers and hormone
For minors?
Yeah. Yes.
Irreversible? You're talking about irreversible?
I'd like to understand your
I just want to be
position.
clear. No, I want to be clear. I just want to be clear.
For minors.
Puberty blockers for minors?
Do you agree with that? Do you agree with that?
I think that we should protect children and their ability to make adult decisions when they're adults.
So you think only adults should make you said yes? Just to be clear, you said yes, only adults should take puberty blockers?
I think we should protect children, let them make adult decisions when they become adults.
So that means you are against puberty blockers for kids under the age of 18. Is that
Yes.
unclear? Okay.
Plus.
Yeah, that was so good. So that was February 7th, 2024. And again, like, I don't think that Pierre had really come out on record at that point as what his position was on. And you have to like keep it in the broader context, which is that the Liberals love divisive social issues. Like, that is their bread and butter. That is how they win elections, is look at these scary conservatives over here. They want to take us back to like a Handmaid's Tale. Yeah. And they try to wrap it all together. And I think that the left lost itself in this gender ideology discussion because they just assumed that they were correct, that they were on the right side, and that Canadians would follow in line just like they did on gay marriage and abortion. Yeah. But this is a different issue. And I think when it comes to confused little kids being pushed into this like ideological, I know you said, conservatives are ideological. I think conservatives just stand for common sense. And the ideological part comes from this extreme left idea that boys can be girls and girls can be boys and it's all just a suggestion and that kids should be non-binary. Like, that is not a mainstream position. And as a mom of little kids, it is something that like really ignites a passion in me. Like, I have no tolerance for it at my children's school or with their teachers or with the books they read. I want it as far away from my family as possible. And I'm not alone. Like, this isn't one of those positions where I'm like just an extreme conservative on. Almost everyone I know and almost everyone I talk to is in complete lockstep agreement with me, to the point where I think a big part of the reason why Donald Trump was so accepted and is so mainstream now is because of these issues where people are just, they've had enough of the wokeness. We don't want it. We don't want it in our schools. So it was great to see Pierre come on board and kind of come out in that way saying, no, we shouldn't give drugs to kids. It's an adult decision. Yeah. And you could see the journalists, they were really kind of hammering on him because he hadn't clarified at that point. I think the journalists were actually just doing their job there. Like, wait, what is your position? What is your position? And he finally came to the right place. But you're right. He needs to actually talk about a policy, right? It's not just about having the right idea and coming to the right position. We need to like get him on record with what he will do on day one and what the policies are. What do you think?
Well, you're right. The left stepped on a beehive with this one. They were gallivanting down this path of, enjoying being able to set up these social issues. Well, oh, the conservatives are these scary racist people, or oh, they're trying to prevent, they're trying to force women to have kids and like the Handmaid's Tale, like super weird stuff. And these were like kind of winning issues for them in the past because they were able to successfully hoodwink Canadians into thinking that conservatives really were these like crazy people. And then they decided to use kids as a pawn in their game, and parents and even people who aren't parents are just like, bro, like, take a step back for a second and understand what you're doing here. When you see the people who have detransitioned and the scars that are literal scars that are left on their mind and body, it's sickening. It's disgusting. There's just so much evidence now that it's a bad idea to allow children, especially children with often parents who they themselves say are trans, who all of a sudden the kids become trans. Like, it's not in the best interests of society or kids to allow them to do it. And I think that Pierre, and I mean, I've spoken with people close to him, and they drew inspiration from Danielle Smith on this. They saw that people supported what she did. All you had to do was be bold, stand on the side of protecting children, and the way forward was paved for you, because Liberals just are completely in disarray when they have to come to terms with something like this.
No, you're right. It was Danielle Smith's policy that kind of catapulted this whole thing, because that was February 7th of last year. And then just 2 weeks later, February 21st, we had Pierre coming out finally with a decisive policy. This was his position on women's prisons and women's sports. Let's play that clip.
My question, sir, is should you form the next federal government, will you make female safe spaces safe again by introducing legislation that bans so-called transgender women from participating in female sports and getting access into female shelters and female prisons?
Female spaces should be exclusively for females, not for biological males. You ask if I introduce legislation on that. A lot of the spaces you described are provincially and municipally controlled. So it is unclear what federal legislation what reach federal legislation would have to change them. But obviously, female sports, female change rooms, female bathrooms should be for females, not for biological males.
First, a little shout out to David Menzies. This is why it's so important to have independent media at these events, because they ask better questions a lot of time than the legacy media. So he kind of defaults to, well, these are provincial jurisdictions. One thing I will note with Donald Trump's executive order is that it just shows leadership, right? Like he can't mandate that the entire country fall in line with what he's doing. But when he does it, it gives permission to other people. Like I saw someone noting on X that Silicon Valley is actually like breathing a sigh of relief because they hate these gender ideology provisions and they hate the diversity, equity, inclusion stuff. And it's like, okay, great, we don't have to do that anymore, right? And it's like gives corporate America an excuse to not do it anymore as well. You're right that Danielle took the lead with banning these sex surgeries and cross-sex hormones to minors. Have you seen any kinds of changes across Alberta society? And do you think that what Pierre said there is the right approach?
I would love to talk to a political expert and understand why Pierre sort of does take this route when he sort of like hands off the onus to the provinces. Trump does the opposite. Even if it's an issue that the states could solve, he does do exactly what you said. He gives them permission to take the right stance, as a leader should. As the first minister of our confederation, Pierre, soon to be potentially, Pierre has like this obligation to show conservatives the way and say it's okay to do this. So it's not a situation of like pushing it onto NDP premiers to solve the issue. It really is a national social issue that we need to have some authority on and explain what should we be doing here. And we need a standard approach across the country when it comes to this kind of stuff, especially women's prisons. The fact that some of the most insidious people in this country can do terrible things and then be put, I'm not an advocate for other criminals who are rightfully in prison, but these women shouldn't be forced to live their lives with some of the most insane people in the world who managed to get into a women's prison. I mean, I won't go into details about some of the court cases I've been involved in British Columbia with someone who assaulted me years ago. But they were of a similar situation where they would end up in a women's prison and they should not have been in a women's prison.
Right, a biological man who is having some kind of a mental break and decides that they're a woman and they're also a criminal. Not in the case necessarily that you're talking about, but this happens. Like there's a story out of Quebec of a man that murdered 3 people and then he goes to jail and now all of a sudden he's a woman and he wants to go in the women's prison. Like I get that female prisoners aren't necessarily the most sympathetic audience that you say, well, they aren't deserving of, the threat and fear of living with a criminal man in their same cell. But it's like at a certain point, like a woman has a right not to be raped, not to be in a situation where they can be raped.
Everyone does.
Even prisoners, even women who are in jail.
And those women are put in a hugely unfortunate situation when they're forced to to be in a cell with these people. A lot of these criminals, female prisoners, they're not violent criminals.
Right.
They're in jail and they're serving a sentence for society, and they shouldn't be put in that situation. So that's the kind of leadership that I would want from our prime minister to tell premiers. Premiers have jails that they're in charge of as well, but so does the federal government. There's different types of prisons in this country, and they all need an understanding of what is okay and what is not okay.
Yeah, and I think that's right. That even many of the women, most of the women who are in women's prison, even the hard offenders who have committed violent crimes, is almost always with women a situation where they've killed their husband or their domestic partner. Like it's almost always like a personal relationship. And so again, the idea that they would be subject to a dangerous male criminal is just unfathomable. That's sort of the less sympathetic argument. The more sympathetic argument is when you have women in sports, like teenagers and girls trying to compete at the top of their level. I was an athlete when I was a teenager, and the whole point of female sports is so that women can have a chance, because they can't compete with men. Men are much bigger. And so this idea that you have men, I know that there's a couple of cases that are going around. It's almost sad. I saw one on social media the other day of a male, I think it was a volleyball player on Vancouver Island University, but this man had gone through a sex basically transformation as a child. So in this video where he's saying, I want to play sports with the girls because I'm a girl. It's a biological boy, but he says that he started transitioning at the age of 5. And so he never went through male puberty. And you have this really sad situation.
Yeah.
Like I have
sympathy for that.
I have so much sympathy, and I feel for him because I feel like he's been the victim of abuse at the hands of his parents and a society that is delusional enough to allow this to go on. And now you have a person who's in the middle of it and living through it. It's really sad. But at the same time, you need the leadership. Didn't you think that clip from Pierre, though, on Breakfast or on CP24, don't you think that is kind of the leadership, the equivalent of what Trump is doing, like giving people permission to take a stance on this issue?
I've just been so burned by conservative leaders in the past who say one thing and then, actually, no, the Paris Accord is great, So especially Aaron O'Toole has really, really burned me. And, he perhaps luckily was not in a position where he was leading the country. So we'll see what Pierre does. I just really don't want to count my chickens before they hatch on this kind of situation.
Fair enough. I've definitely been in that situation myself. Okay, let's talk a bit more about your time in Washington. So, you were down there. You said you were talking to congressional aides for the Republicans. Tell us first, what brought you down there? Why were you there? And then maybe talk a little bit about your highlights of your time.
Well, the last time I was in Washington, D.C. was to document January 6th, which I feel like I can talk about now because I was constantly worried that people were going to be upset for me being there as a journalist. Not that I broke any laws.
January 6, 2021, you were there.
Yes.
For the so-called insurrection I don't know if we have to call it that anymore.
Yeah. No, you see the picture of that guy with his feet up on Nancy Pelosi's desk, and people call him someone who's throwing a coup somewhere, and then you see leftists doing the exact same thing, having a sit-in, breaking into someone's office in Congress and sitting in and not allowing them to conduct the business.
It happens all the time.
Happens constantly. There's a few people who vandalized. That's vandalism, not great. Did they try to get the codes? Did they try to overtake the military and hijack nuclear missile silos? No, they didn't. This was not an insurrection. Anyways, last time
I just want to say, there is some social context that's missing, right? We were just living through COVID. We just witnessed an entire summer full of the George Floyd riots, Black Lives Matter, burning things down. There were lots and lots of riots all over North America that year, right? And so not to excuse the behavior, I think that there were some bad actors and bad behavior on January 6th, but by and large, it was a protest, right? It was a protest in support of Trump, in protest against a lot of really crazy things that happened in the 2020 election, a lot of irregularities, a lot of media interference, a lot of things that we now know about, things like the Twitter files, that they were actually manipulating the information behind the scenes, blocking the Hunter laptop Biden story from getting out. Like, there was a lot to be angry about at that time. And usually with any kind of situation like this, there's a couple of really bad actors that kind of ignite it, right? And then everyone else is just there and they kind of get caught in the wrong spot. And we know for sure that there were feds there. I think that there was a report that said there was at least 20 or at least 40 feds
over 20.
that were instigating this.
And committing crimes.
So I don't like the idea that you can just blanket pardon people. I don't think it was good when Biden was doing it. When Trump did it, but at the same time, I think it had to be done, and I think that a lot of people are happy about it.
Well, Biden doing what he did made it the easiest decision. I wonder if Trump was wondering if it was a good idea or not, and then Biden pardons his family as his last action of government.
And Fauci. And
that too. Like, what a disaster.
Yeah.
So, anyways, last time I was there was January 6th, and the atmosphere was very similar. So I wanted to be there for this. I wanted to see what what people were doing. These moments in history are always so great to be at and witness with your own eyes, because you can share it with your viewers so that they feel like they're there as well. And you can give them like this your viewers trust you, and you can give them this honest depiction of what happened. If we left it to the CBC, who I was standing beside during January 6th, to relay to Canadians what was going on, Canadians would think that it was an insurrection, and many do. Yeah. So I was glad that I was able to be there, and in case whatever happened, we'd be able to be there to document it. And I was lucky enough to be able to get into the Canadian embassy, which, funny enough, the last time I was there, I was also thrown out by Bill Morneau, because I was trying to go to a Bill Morneau press conference, and they threw me out. They named me persona non grata on my own embassy, which is just weird.
That didn't happen this time.
Didn't happen this time. I was welcomed in. I mean, there was a lot of conservatives celebrating there. It was sort of like a conservative victory party. So Liz Truss was there. Danielle Smith was there. Danielle Smith wasn't like celebrating. She was there doing interviews and working, but Liz Truss was pretty happy. There was a lot of Liberal staffers there as well, though. Both like diplomatic staff and actual Liberal staffers that were just sort of there. You could tell because they had the red lanyards on, but if that wasn't enough of a sign, they were also crying. So it was pretty entertaining to watch. Oh yeah, they were head in their hands, just completely upset, devastated, sitting in the foyer.
You should have filmed that. We could have had some nice Liberal tears.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I got to get one of those cups from the Daily Wire. But most of it was celebration, and it was great to be able to chat with Liz Truss as well. I interviewed her there, and that went. I was a little bit surprised, but extremely viral.
Well, we have that clip. Let's play it. This is Keean catching up with former Conservative Prime Minister of the UK, Liz Truss, talking about Mark Carney.
Yeah.
Wanting to get your thoughts on Mark Carney and your relationship with him while you were Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and any advice you have to Canadians who think he might make a good Prime Minister.
Well, Mark Carney was Governor of the Bank of England, and under his tenure, too much money was printed, which did damage to the British economy and put our economy off track. He, at the last election, endorsed Rachel Reeves' economic policy. She's now become Chancellor. It's been a disaster for Britain. The country is heading for bankruptcy. So I would strongly recommend not backing Mark Carney or his policies on net zero, which have been disastrous for Britain and would be disastrous for Canada.
Do you trust his judgment overall, outside of ideological considerations?
Well, I believe that he made major mistakes in the management of the Bank of England. He has pushed net zero, which has been a disaster, not just for the UK, but for many countries across the world.
Great interview there. And you just have this uncanny ability to find people.
It's
and
weird,
you bumped into Ted Cruz as well in your time there. So what else were your takeaways from DC?
Well, I want to take a minute and point out there, like that's what I want to do. I want to ask people questions that Canadians and my audience in general want answers to. And I was able to fly across the continent, go to an embassy, and ask a former prime minister of a G7 country, a pretty big deal, a basic question, and get something that was extremely valuable content-wise. That's what I wanted to do with Mark Carney. He wants to be anointed leader of the Liberal Party and then appointed prime minister of this country. And I wanted to ask him simple questions. It was different questions, and he might not have liked to answer them. In this case, of course, Liz Truss was happy to talk about Mark Carney because she really does not like him. She attributes his downfall, her downfall in her short term as prime minister to him and his money printing policies. So, it's different questions, and obviously they can be prickly, and who knows what the questions are going to be. I usually determine what they're going to be about an hour before I ask the person, or sometimes on the spot. In that case with Liz Truss, it was just out of my pocket, right? But Liz Truss didn't need to arrest me. Even if those questions were going to be prickly or more prickly, there doesn't need to be police intervention. So it makes me wonder, why does Mark Carney, and not just Mark Carney, Justin Trudeau as well, Chrystia Freeland, why do they rely on the police to prevent them from being asked accountability questions? It's a huge issue in Canada. I can't go into Parliament to ask these questions in a official setting. They will not accredit me because I don't live in Ottawa. That's the rule for the Parliamentary Press Gallery. That's what they say. I'm sure if I was anyone else, they would bend the rules. But it means that I have to either find interesting places to find them on the street, on a beach, whatever, or at a press conference somewhere that is not highly controlled by parliamentary security. So it's frustrating to me that I have to fly across the world to go to a foreign country to ask
a foreign
leader questions. I can walk, as a Canadian journalist, I can walk into the White House press room. I've done it many times before, and it's pretty simple. They say, First Amendment also applies to you. The rights of media access also apply to you as a foreign journalist. I cannot do that in Canada. In fact, during Donald Trump's first term, the only time I've ever been able to get a question close to Trudeau up until that point, obviously I met him on a beach recently, but I had to fly to the White House. I'd be kicked out of Parliament. I'd have to go to the White House for Trudeau's foreign visit to see Donald Trump there, and then I could ask him questions. Of course, his media team was furious, and they pushed me around in the White House.
And did you get questions through at that time?
They didn't respond, but we were able to shout them to him and get the point across of what we wanted to ask. And it's the point of it is the access. You have the ability to get there and ask a question. If they want to respond, they respond. It's up to them. But there shouldn't be a police force between someone who represents the people and wants to get answers from those in power and and relay sort of a message between the two and actually have some accountability between the two. There shouldn't be a police force able to determine if you meet the right partisan, check if you check off the right partisan boxes to be allowed in the room. That's insane. And
it's totally insane. Well, two points on that. One, it always kind of blows my mind. It's remarkable that you could get up to Prime Minister Truss like that and ask her a question. The clip went viral. Everyone was really interested in hearing what she had to say. And no one in the legacy media thought to do that, right? Like, for all the resources, all the money that the CBC and CTV and all these different newspapers and outlets, they all had presence in Washington. But they're not doing that. They're not actually doing the kind of journalism that Canadians are interested in. The second point, just so that the viewers and listeners understand the full context. So Keean was one of the journalists who was at Mark Carney's launch party in Edmonton last week, where he launched his leadership. And Keean was basically stopped by police, not allowed into the building, not allowed to go to the event. Mark Carney decided to launch his campaign in Edmonton. I guess he grew up there or spent a bit of time in his childhood there. He certainly doesn't live there now. He's certainly not an Edmontonian. But the idea was that you and a handful of other independent journalists, including True North's Isaac Lamoureux, were not, I don't know what their justification was, that you weren't journalists or that you weren't allowed. I mean, you're an Albertan and he's in your province and he's refusing to ask questions.
On local media.
It's absolutely outrageous. And same with Isaac Lamoureux. I mean, Isaac's more polite than you. He's not going to, try to make a fuss about it. You're a tough cookie. You're not taking no for an answer. And so you tried to fight your way in until the police came and eventually escorted you away. Walk us through a little bit, what was their rationale? What was the reason? Why wouldn't they let you in? What do you think Mark Carney is afraid of?
Yeah, we didn't publish all of what happened there. I mean, we have most of it on video. Unfortunately, I got these new Meta sunglasses to film video. Cool. They failed on me that day, which disappointed me a bit because those would have caught footage of his campaign team locking my leg in a door, closing a door on my leg, and then putting their legs and body in between me and the door to keep me locked there, unable to move or go into a different room.
Sounds a little bit like assault. I can't believe that happened.
Absolutely. And so but I don't want to be known as the journalist who always has the police called on them. Like it's awful. It's a terrible situation to be in, to have to negotiate with the police to do your job. Like I'm not a villain. I'm not dangerous, obviously, or else I wouldn't be allowed in the White House. And they're able to basically tarnish my reputation by saying, look, he's the kind of guy who needs the cops called on him because he's so rambunctious, or he's going to break rules or be, a bad person. Like it's weird.
Have you ever interrupted an event? Have you ever gone in and like shouted out somebody while they were talking or giving a speech? Like, I mean, we saw Chrystia Freeland giving her announcement, and you had a bunch of people out there calling her part of a genocide and pushing their Gaza issue. Have you ever done anything like that?
I don't think so. I mean,
I've only ever seen you ask questions as a journalist.
I
mean, you've shouted questions at someone who's running across the street, or we'll get to Justin Trudeau on the beach. But I don't think I've ever seen you interrupt an event.
In polite company, you want to be polite. You don't want to be the person that like runs in front of the cameras and busts up an event just so that you can get some silly question to someone who probably won't answer it anyways. That's not the purpose. The purpose is to get a thoughtful question that Canadians want answers to, asked to and responded by someone of significance who needs to be held accountable, or has something of intrigue, like Liz Truss, who doesn't need to be held accountable necessarily, but has some advice for people. And you want to be able to give that to your readers and viewers. That's the goal. The goal is not to cause a scene at all. So we didn't publish a lot of that because we didn't want to be known as those people that police get called on when we do our job. But we did have to show that Mark Carney's the kind of guy that calls the police on journalists, because it wasn't just me.
Right.
We were accredited. We applied. We received the invitation. That's the only reason we knew where it was, because it was actually quite secret.
Right.
We got the invitation the next morning. I drove up from Calgary, and we were steps away from getting in. And some guy who would not.
Sorry, who's we? You were with someone from the Western Standard?
I was with. There was someone from the Western Standard. We all drove up separately, but Isaac was there. The Western Standard was there. Mocha was there. And we were about to step in, and they just said, no, you're not coming in. And we were like, okay, who are you? And he wouldn't identify himself. We asked if he was with the campaign. I'd never seen him before. He was just some guy. And we said, are you with the campaign? No, I'm not with the campaign. I'm just a random guy, he said. And which is weird, because
then why does he have authority to let you in or out?
Exactly. And then people who I think, who now later people tell me, it was this guy named Stephen Carter, maybe, or something. I don't really know him. He was sort of liaising with this thug who was holding my leg in a door. Super weird behavior for a political campaign in Canada. It seemed like something out of a third world. And, people needed to see that. People need to see that that's what Mark Carney's going to do. I mean, I wasn't at Chrystia Freeland's launch. I was at the inauguration. I wonder if she would have done the same thing.
Well, it doesn't seem like her event was nearly as secure. Just given the fact, I was really surprised that those protesters got in. They had like a large banner. Like, how do you get a banner like that into a political event? It's so weird, Keean. It's like in some ways the Canadian political class is like so locked down and you can't get to them, and then in other ways they're totally exposed and like actually things could have gone a lot worse. Like if you could sneak a big sign into a campaign launch for Chrystia Freeland, what else could you sneak in there?
Yeah, and I don't want to be an advocate for tightening up access to politicians. I think that's a great thing about Canada, that we are able to get that access. But then you compare it to the United States, and it's very different. Someone can walk off the streets and go up to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's office, sit in the front office of it, and wait for her to come out. And they can get their phone number. Imagine, and they can get their email. The emails of our MPs are hidden. They're not publicly accessible. You could email justin.trudeau@parle.gc.ca, and it'll go to a bureaucrat or the actual email that goes to his BlackBerry or iPhone or any other member of Parliament is like first name dot last name dot a string of digits. And that will go to them if you are an insider or an elite or also a politician. And I get that their phone can't be blowing up all the time and they have work to do, but the access that we have isn't anywhere close to what the Americans get, which, you gotta hand it to them. Being a congressman or senator, you're accessible to the people, and they know that. They know that their job is to represent the people and help them. Canadian members of parliament, I don't think, have that same opinion of themselves.
It's interesting that you said that any journalist can kind of show up at the White House and go to a press briefing, that their First Amendment guarantees that. How do they prevent? Because just to like play devil's advocate, you hear the libs or the establishment people in Canada say, well, not just anyone can be a journalist. Like not every citizen from Twitter can just show up and expect to ask questions of their prime minister. So how does the U.S. stop just like every single like streamer and citizen journalist on X from showing up to an event? Or they just don't worry about it.
At the end of the day, who cares if they do?
Yeah.
Right. But I shouldn't say that anyone can. I was able to get in. You submit like some documents to, I think it's maybe Homeland Security, and they audit you, make sure that you're not a bad person. And they're a journalist. Okay, you're in. So there is some like steps to go through. It's not a walk in the front door kind of thing. You have to let them go through your background, and because you're in the president's house, you got to be a safe person.
For sure.
But if you're a journalist, that gives you some credibility, and obviously you got to be a safe person, non-violent, not a criminal. But their definition of journalist is quite broad in the United States.
Right.
In Canada, they like to think that you have to have gone to some journalism college to have the title of journalist. Like it's like some sort of doctorate.
But not even that, because True North hires from journalism schools. So Harrison Faulkner went to Ryerson. Rachel Parker went to Carleton Journalism School. And I don't think that they're getting any different treatment than you. Like if you work for an independent press outlet, they don't consider you to be a real journalist. It's not just Mark Carney. It seems to be a bit of a theme. So I noticed our mutual friend Ezra Levant was in Davos, Switzerland. And he also just unbelievable, the ability to find these people. So he caught up with BlackRock CEO Larry Fink, to ask them about their DEI policies in the wake of Donald Trump's victory. So let's play that clip.
Mr. Fink, are you going to follow Donald Trump's plan and get rid of DEI and ESG in your companies? BlackRock really is the opposite of Donald Trump in so many ways. You're authoritarian, you're anti-populist, you're top-down. Are you going to change it all in light of the U.S. presidency? How is Donald Trump, have you talked to Donald Trump since he was elected? Is the World Economic Forum a counterpoint to Donald Trump? Why are you running away from simple questions? Just answer a question. Have you talked to President Trump yet? Why are your bodyguards pushing away journalists, Mr. Fink?
So good for Ezra for doing that and getting in there. I think we missed the part where the guy took his phone out and took a picture of Ezra. That was a little bit creepy. Davos is always an interesting time. We had our own Andrew Lawton. Unfortunately, as folks know, Andrew has decided to go and run for parliament. So he's a Conservative candidate in London. So he's no longer doing his show, The Andrew Lawton Show. And unfortunately, we weren't able to send him to Davos this year. But in the past, Andrew has been our man that goes down there. And it's just so amusing. So I'll play this clip. This is Andrew Lawton. He caught up with Christine Lagarde, who's the head of the European Central Bank, tried to ask her a question, and she resisted. So let's play that clip.
Good afternoon, ma'am. How can people have confidence in digital currencies and government not using it as a tool of control?
I'm not giving any interview. I'm not speaking because I'm in a quiet period.
This is about rebuilding trust this year. How can people have trust in these institutions when governments wield so much control?
Mrs. Lagarde, where's the privacy of the people?
Shouldn't you be answering questions if this conference's theme is rebuilding trust, ma'am?
He's skillful. You definitely lost some talent there but the great thing is Canada's going to gain something there. You know where he's coming from with what he's saying there. That was a really good question that he asked her, and something that I wish we actually got an answer to.
Well, I mean, I'm having a quiet period. It's so perfect for the WEF and how they regard the regular people. And Andrew, such a talented journalist. It's sad to lose him, although I know he's going to do great things in Parliament. Another one he caught up with, this is from a few years ago. He caught up with none other than Mark Carney, trying to do an interview on the streets there in Davos. Let's play that clip.
Hi, Mr. Carney. Andrew Lawton with True North in Canada.
Nice to see you. I never do spontaneous.
I understand. My one question is, could the Canadian oil and gas sector survive the net zero approach that's being promoted here?
As I said, I never do. If you want an interview with me, like everybody else, you make a request and we can have it.
And will you accept that?
Yeah, he never accepted the actual
really?
interview.
Shocker.
Surprise. But at least I like how he does an interview because he's answering the questions just to say I don't do interviews. It's like, well, whether you realize it or not, Mr. Carney, you're literally doing an interview right now. Okay, I have to throw to this, Keean, because this is something that made you even more famous than you already were. I don't know how you did it, but we have this clip of you from the summer of, was it 2023? With Tofino, with Justin Trudeau?
With Trudeau, yeah. It was last summer.
Last summer. Yeah. Okay, so here is Keean Bexte, who managed to catch up with none other than the Prime Minister of Canada while he was on vacation. Let's play that clip.
Are you enjoying your time on vacation? Good. You having a good time on vacation, sir?
I'm
Are you
happy
on
to speak with
vacation?
you because actually
you
this
on
is the first
vacation?
time we've been
Are
able
you
to
on
speak
vacation?
with you because your government is so... We want to know why you can justify going on a chartered government flight when your minister says that going on a simple road trip...
right here.
Okay. Sure, thank you.
I'll be with you in a bit.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
So tell me.
I just want to
No,
I asked the questions.
You asked about your mom. You asked about your mom. Okay?
Sure.
Do you think Prime Minister should be able to have a family life?
Absolutely.
Okay. Can you imagine?
Now, one question. I get to ask one question.
You've
You asked
asked
one
multiple
question.
questions.
You haven't
I'm gonna
answered
ask
one though.
more.
So
I'm going to ask one more.
families get. Prime ministers get to have a family life. Journalists also get to have access to prime ministers.
I have. Okay. So what's your question?
Well, I want to know if you're hiding from your caucus, why you won't call a caucus meeting.
I am not hiding from my caucus, and I've had many conversations and meetings with caucus.
That's just the absolute best kind of journalism, and props to you for catching. You know, we were just talking about how Canadians don't really have access to our leaders, and so you have to find a way, and you did it. Tell us a little bit about how you managed to get Justin Trudeau, and a little bit about the reaction.
Well, the reaction was something else. We knew he was in BC. He, unlike most democratically elected leaders in the Western world, we don't get a detailed itinerary from Justin Trudeau. We know where Donald Trump is every second of every day. Maybe that comes with having the codes to nuclear weapons. Maybe it's just being a serious country. I don't know. But all we got was that he was in British Columbia taking personal days. So I thought, okay, where is he likely to be in BC? He's probably not skiing. He goes to Tofino often. I checked the Tofino Facebook group and they're like, oh, what's this motorcade about? So I was like, okay, so he's there. So we get on a plane, like a float plane, and we go out there and we walk around and we find his motorcade. Pretty easy to spot. We see his RCMP detail between this house that we knew that he had stayed at in the past and the beach, and we just sort of waited out there in beach gear, sort of if we could catch him on a stroll, then we'd ask him a few questions. This wasn't something that I thought would be extremely controversial. Global News did this before when he went to that very same house on Truth and Reconciliation Day. That was newsworthy. A news organization deemed it to be newsworthy, and the reaction, the value that people saw in that afterwards deemed it as well. And his minister had just told Canadians that going on a road, like the context of this is his minister Mark Holland said that going on a road trip is causing the world to burn. And it is the responsibility of Canadians to ration how often they go on vacation. And then Justin Trudeau charters a private jet.
Right, because somehow us driving in our car for like 2 hours is going to end the planet.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, this guy's off on a private jet going around the country. Okay,
yeah.
Continue.
So I wanted to ask him about that. Don't you see the hypocrisy? But of course, he thinks he's different. He really does. At the base of his personality, he thinks that he has been bestowed on Canada by God to save us as a Trudeau. So he thinks that the rules are not for him. Even the rules that he sets are not for him. And we wanted to ask him those questions. Now, did I expect he had like 14 minutes, I think it was, with him? No. I was glad that I was able to get some, I had a lot of questions stacked up over time to ask him. And it was nice of him to give me that time, but you could tell from the start of that interview that he didn't think I was a journalist. He thought that I was just a regular guy on vacation because I was in beach gear probably, but we had some serious questions to ask him and I was glad we were able to. The reaction was, from our audience, they were very happy. We get arrested when we show up to ask him questions, as evidenced by what happened with Mark Carney. It's his staff running Mark Carney's campaign. So it's, exactly the same thing. We're banned from Parliament. I've been arrested and hauled out of Rideau Hall when he was having a COVID press conference because his press advance Terry Guion, who's a terrible piece of scum, worst person in the world. Justin Trudeau has him deciding what journalists are allowed in and out. He sicked the RCMP on me to send me away. So we have to find novel ways of finding the prime minister.
Right.
And it was on a beach. The prime minister was on vacation, but he takes like 116 days of vacation a year. So it's like a 1 in 3 chance that he's going to be on vacation on any given day.
Right.
So are we just not allowed to talk to the prime minister for a third of the year? Absolutely not. Some people were upset, mainly Liberals, and the reaction that they had was just completely unhinged. Personal attacks, death threats, threatening to show up at private events of my family, unhinged behavior. I'm not the leader of a G7 country. I don't control a military. I don't control an economy, and I don't get paid like $200 bajillion a year. Justin Trudeau does, and he has an obligation to respond to questions and explain to Canadians why he thinks he still has the moral authority to govern. This was right after his poll numbers plummeted. He was polling at like 20% at this point in time. 8 in 10 Canadians wanted him out. So how is it my fault for asking him questions? Well, Liberals told me that I was just an evil, terrible person for doing this. Conservatives, they loved it because they knew that this is the only way you can actually get questions to him. The mainstream media, although there's that one guy, I think his name was Jordan Armstrong, came to that same beach house to ask him questions 2 years prior.
Right.
Not many people in the parliamentary press gallery would ask him the questions that I asked him that day.
They were pointed, they were good, they were professional. I have to give you credit because you could see, I was, first of all, to say I was impressed by Justin Trudeau for kind of pushing, I think that those were like his bodyguards. He kind of pushed him back and said, I'm going to go for a walk with Keean.
Yeah.
He kind of grabs you and he's really up close to you doing what Trudeau does. But he was trying to charm you, right?
Yeah.
And he was trying to evoke sympathy and he was trying to come across as very human, and you were having none of it.
Yeah.
Like you answered his questions and you were super respectful. I don't think you were rude. I don't think you were unruly. You were respectful, but you weren't buying into his BS. He's probably not used to that. He's probably not used to being able to, he puts on the charm and then the people fall in line. And that's everyone around him probably his entire life. So I think it was a little bit, put him off guard for someone like you to be so firm, but also this is of their own making, right? They create an environment where independent journalists who have valid questions, who speak for millions and millions of Canadians, don't get the chance to actually ask our prime minister. Like, I would love for you to go find Justin Trudeau wherever he is right now and do the same thing. Be like, why haven't you stepped down? Why are you still prime minister? Why are you putting the Liberal Party ahead of the good of the country? Like, what are you doing? Why weren't you down in Washington? Why aren't you negotiating with Trump? There's, again, a million questions that Canadians would love to know of this guy. I don't know where the media is. I don't know why they're not answering these questions. And this is all Justin Trudeau's fault for not allowing you in the first place.
He's made his own bed when it comes to this kind of thing. By sheltering himself from questions that are, Donald Trump lets any reporter ask him tough questions. Maybe he ridicules them.
Yeah.
But maybe he shuts them down. Justin Trudeau just doesn't. I think that they know deep down he doesn't have the competency to do that. He is disarming a little bit when you're interviewing him like that. You mentioned he grabs you, like he physically grabbed me and said, "Okay, we're walking this way," which is a weird thing. He does that. He does that to. I've heard a lot of people say that he does that to them, and it's weird when it happens to you. He's a very handsy person, and he tries to control the conversation, and because that's who he is. He thinks that everything revolves around him, that he determines when you can speak, where you can stand, when you sit, when you talk. And he doesn't like answering questions. So that's sort of played into this whole 9 years of him avoiding any sort of accountability and us having to find novel and unique ways to speak to him.
Well, it's not a good sign that Mark Carney is doing the same thing, hiring the same thugs. I do think he'll be the next prime minister of his country. Hopefully not for very long. Hopefully at some point we'll get a democratic election. I launched a petition today. I encourage everyone to go check out my website, CandiceMalcolm.com. Please sign that petition. I would love to get 1 million signatures and hand it to the Governor General. Like, I'll get you to come with me. We'll track down the Governor General. We'll hand it to her in person. It needs to be done. We need an election, Canada. Well, Keean, it's so great to have you in studio. Thank you so much for coming out here, and keep up the great work. Keep up the great journalism.
More often.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in. That's it for us today. Thank you. We'll be back again tomorrow with all the news. God bless.